Hello and welcome to our very first webinar of the fall 2019 school year. I am Amanda Klinger.
And I'm Dr. Amy Klinger. Welcome.
We are very glad that those of you who are able to join us live, and for those of you who are not joining us live, I realize in the age of Netflix and DVR, joining something live is not what it used to be. But this is our first webinar of the fall 2019-2020 school year, and we're going to talk a little bit about the research that we do and what we saw last year in regards to violent incidents and threats in schools.
All right, so let's get started. I'm hoping my dogs don't bark, my phone doesn't ring, all of those things. So fingers crossed, everybody. So here we go. We want to kind of start out by introducing ourselves. We are the Educators School Safety Network. We are a national nonprofit with a very simple, straightforward mission, and that is to put training, resources, and research in the hands of the folks who are going to use them, and that's educators. So we do a lot of direct training and a lot of work directly in the field with teachers, but we also have found that there isn't always good information about what's really happening in schools right now or in the very recent past, as opposed to, longitudinal studies from 10 years ago. So that's why we sort of got into some of the unfunded research that we do, and that's what we'd like to share with you today. Can you add, Amanda, do you want to add anything to that? We're going to also run through these pictures of ourselves, even though you can see us, which seems a little bit odd. But hopefully you get the idea that we're going to have a kind of an informal sort of back and forth discussion about this research and hopefully add to your professional practice as part of it. So we'll get started. Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself? You haven't had a chance to say much.
Well, sure. I am Amanda Klinger. I'm an attorney by training. I do this work full time. I sort of got roped into this by Dr. Klinger, who is my mom. You probably have figured that out. But she has 28 years of experience in public education, and I think her expertise is really what makes our organization unique in that she is really able to hold people's feet to the fire because she has sat where you've sat as educators and understands how difficult that work is, even more so than I can possibly do. And so everything that we do is through that lens of an educational focus.
Well, this school year that we're talking about entering is my 29th year in public education, primarily as a building level principal at the elementary and the secondary levels. So some of what we're going to talk about today really transcends just administration and really talks about educators in general, school staff in general, parents, all of those school stakeholders that have an interest in what's happening in schools. So we're going to come from that sort of K-12 perspective today.
So what we do as an organization, we're going to talk today about the research that we do, but we are primarily a training organization. So we provide professional development, school safety professional development from an educational perspective, and we work a lot on site with schools and school districts in K-12. We work some in higher ed. We try to produce a lot of resources and a lot of things that are available for folks to elevate their professional practice. And as we go throughout the webinar today, obviously it's only an hour. And so there's a lot that we can't cram into this time, although I'm going to talk really fast and we're going to try to cram a lot in. There's only so much you can cram in an hour. And so we're going to refer to some of the other resources that we have and other things that can help enhance your professional practice when it comes to school safety, because everything that we do as an organization is based in that notion of empowering educators to do this critical work. We're not trying to scare folks. It's 2019. People know that there's a possibility for violence in our schools. And so we're trying to instead go, so what are we going to do about it? And how can we do that in a way that supports our fundamental mission, which is educating students? So do you want to go ahead and jump in and talk about the research?
Yeah, I think, you set the table very nicely for us in the sense that if we are going to work diligently to empower people to keep our schools safe and to prevent violence, we have to know what we're up against. We have a lot of perceptions of what's happening and perceptions and beliefs of what we're up against or what the threats are that we face based on past history. And unfortunately, sometimes those have taken on an enlarged sense, maybe more so than they need to. So if you haven't already done so, I encourage you to download the report that we just released last week. This is our annual report that we put out every year, where we take a look at the past school year and we look at violent threats and violent incidents. And we talk about them in relationship to the school year, but also longitudinally, looking back at some of our past research. And so I encourage you to take a look at it, because it gives you an overview of the methodology and the limitations and some of the research aspects of it, as well as some details. And you can find it on our website. But in general, we are pulling together and aggregating violent threats and violent incidents that occur in U.S. schools from August 1st till the end of June, from 2018 to 2019, so this past school year. And we are defining a threat as an expressed intent to do harm. And we have a lot of data and conversations about what that looks like, and all kinds of things that we may not be able to get into necessarily today, but there's a lot of aspects to threats. And then we also track violent incidents. And an incident is essentially defined as when something happens that moves beyond the resources of the school. So if you have two students shoving each other in the locker room, that's not recorded as a violent incident. But when you have a fight with 25 kids in the cafeteria, law enforcement gets involved. That's considered as an incident. So when something happens that requires assistance or overwhelms the resources of the school and is not part of their day-to-day operational things, then that is categorized as an incident. The other caveat before we get started is these are aggregated based on media reports. So if it doesn't make it into the media, we don't know about it. So this is, we look at this nationally, but if you had a bomb threat, let's say, and no one ever reported it, it was just dealt with internally by the administration and no one knew about it, we don't know about it either, and it's not in this data. So it's really important to understand that we are showing you a slice of this, but we also know that these numbers are underreported. So the problem, or the things that we want you to consider, are at least this bad, if not more, because we know we don't have all of the incidents that actually occur. Amanda, do you want to add anything about the research methodology before we plunge right in?
No, I think that's the most important thing, that, this research is completely unfunded. So we know that we have some limitations, and the way that we erred on the side of, we know the problem is at least as concerning as what we're able to quantify in this report. Right. Is it possible that it's worse than that? Yeah, it's possible. And as you indicated, there's things that might happen and not make it into media reports, and so they don't get aggregated into our data. So let's go ahead and jump right in, and I want to talk about the first key findings. So the first thing that we found, which those of you who follow us on social media and work with us and have some of our other resources won't be surprised by this, active shooters were not the most common incident of the incidents that we tracked. Only 6% of all of the tracked incidents involved a shooting in any way. Here we have a graph showing about the different types of incidents. Our most common type was a false report or a mock attack, or the report of a suspicious person. And I think this speaks to the concern and the discussion that we're going to get into in just a little bit, that active shooters takes up such a huge amount of space in our collective consciousness as Americans. Parents are terrified, educators are upset, students know that there's the capacity for violence in our schools. And I think the number one incident being false reports, mock attacks, and the reports of a suspicious person is the result of that. People either purposefully, in the case of a false report or a mock attack, or accidentally, that fear is being weaponized. And we can talk in a little bit about the concern of something being just a threat, or nothing actually happened, or no one was injured. There is a cost to our students, emotionally, psychologically, and there is a cost to academic achievement when we spend time chasing down these things that it turns out was a false report. And the fact of the matter is, when there's a report of a suspicious person that is called in as an active shooter, or there is a false report, or someone brings a water gun and pretends to perpetrate a shooting, hindsight being 2020, we can say, oh, it was just this, nothing actually happened. In that moment, people were reacting as if it was an active shooter, and there is a cost, and we can't downplay that.
And that's the dilemma that schools are facing. We know that these horrific acts occur, And so we have to be prepared, and we have to deal with those, and we have to consider that. And that has to be a part of our safety planning. But we also can't have it be the only thing, because our research indicates it is not the most likely event that's going to happen at your school. And the problem is, when you look at these statistics and you look at 6%, that doesn't mean you're never going to have anything else. It's looking at the likelihood, or the frequency of an actual active shooter event when compared to the level of fear and anxiety that you see with reports of false attacks, the assumption that if something bad is going to happen in a school, it's going to be a shooting, when in reality, there's lots of other things. So we kind of wanted to give you some data, talk a little bit about some examples, and then have a little bit of a takeaway, because it's not just about admiring the problem, it's also about sort of solving it. So there's a couple examples, and all the examples we're going to give you today occurred in the last school year. This occurred in last October, when someone had reported that there was a drunk individual trying to grab children off the playground. The information was put out there to the public to be on the lookout for this person. They ended up with a lockdown, securing the kids, and then after investigation, it never even happened. Now, we don't know, why or all the specifics of that, but here was a belief, and this is an example of this false report. There was a false report that something really awful was happening, and the school had the dilemma, and I think made the right choice to immediately try to push information out there and immediately try to get on top of this. But it ended up being a false report. And so as we looked at this research, we really wanted to kind of look at what exactly does that false report constitute. So oftentimes it's someone reporting something. Amanda just sent me one yesterday of someone with a cow that had escaped from a nearby, I think it was a stockyard, and someone was looking for the cow that happened to have a weapon, and it was called in as someone with a gun coming onto the school premises, but they were taking the cow back. And so the school went into lockdown and all these other things. And that's not blaming the school. It's just that's the reality of currently what is.
And I think it really speaks to the difficult position that schools are in. If there is a report that someone is trying to steal kids, or here in my next example, this was a false report that was made deliberately. A student called 911 on the anniversary of Sandy Hook to report an active shooter. If a school receives information like that, how difficult that position is. You can't go, well, it's probably a kid making a false report, or they probably were mistaken. There probably wasn't someone trying to snatch kids. They have to respond appropriately until investigation can reveal what actually was the case at the time.
Yep.
So this really speaks to a concern that we always talk about, which is that school safety isn't just about active shooter response. School safety, the way that we approach this work and the way that we hope schools are approaching this work, is a comprehensive all hazards approach to school safety, where we're talking about all of the typical hazards and all of the things that might happen and that schools face. So school safety isn't just about active shooter response, but our school safety trainings and drills almost always are. And so I think it's important to look at and place this in context of what other research says. So David Roperick, who is a Harvard lecturer, talks about the psychology of risk perception. Now, Dr. Klinger, I know you just were reading this book. Do you want to speak to this one?
No, but I'll hold it up. I was looking at it while I was standing here. No, I think it really capsulizes the issue of our increased awareness of the possibility of a school shooting has resulted in inflating the frequency of it and the belief that it's happening so much more often. And with also the idea that as schools we've kind of owned this idea that if you're going to run into an active shooter, boys and girls, it's going to be at school. No, it is very likely that gun violence is going to be run into in the neighborhood, at a movie theater, at a shopping mall, or somewhere else. We should not be owning this issue that there is the potential for gun violence. So if you look at the odds they're pretty astronomical. 1 in 614 million that a student will be shot and killed at school. The odds are greater that the student will be killed on the way to school or will be killed in participating in school sports than that they will be killed in a school shooting. So think about that. We don't do a whole lot with safety of arrival and dismissal. and getting to school. We don't do as much with safety in after hours sort of events, but yet the likelihood is greater that a student will be killed in those two events at school than in an actual active shooting at school. And then it goes on to sort of look at some of these statistics from the Department of Education. Between 1992 and 2015, fewer than 3% of all child murders occurred at school. Now, does that mean that 3% is acceptable? Absolutely not. And we are in no way minimizing the impact and the value of preparing and training for these events. But it can't be the only thing that we do when we talk about school safety, or we are making our schools less safe. When the only thing we're doing is active shooter, we are not dealing with the more likely problems and crisis events a school will face.
So the question is, if we know that active shooters are statistically rare, and we know that it is taking up an outsized amount of space in our collective consciousness. So the question is, what should we do about it? And I think, Dr. Klinger, you just hinted at this. We have to create space in our mind for both things. We have to prepare for the statistically rare event, an active shooter, but we have to open up space. We only have so many hours of professional development in a school year. We have to open up space to do school safety preparation and have conversations and have professional development about all of the other types of hazards that schools face. And most importantly, we have to make sure that we're doing this in a way that empowers educators, not intimidates them. And we'll talk about this impact on students in a little bit, but it's really important, when we have abdicated some of this work to law enforcement. And I think it's important to remember, school safety is an educational issue that happens to involve safety and security. It is not a law enforcement issue that happens to take place in our schools. And this is something that we talk about a lot, and it's a subtle distinction, but we cannot take our normal modalities of policing and simply place them on top of schools. Now, this is not to say that law enforcement can be incredible partners. They can. They have important expertise, and when we see schools that have good working relationships with their local law enforcement and their local fire and EMS, that is a wonderful thing. But we cannot say to law enforcement, come solve this problem for me. It is an educational issue, and they can be partners, but it needs to have an educational solution. Part of that we always talk about is that we have a comprehensive all hazards approach. If the only school safety trainer and the only professional development or the only drill we ever do is about an active shooter, we need to rethink the approach that we're making. Do you want to talk about this, the risk matrix that we have?
And the reason that I put this in here is I want you to reflect on this just a little bit, because if we really look at the findings here in number one, that only 6% of the events were actual active shootings, and if we took any incident involving a gun, the presence or the use of a gun, we're at still less than 25%, right around 24%. So if we had to plot this matrix of high frequency to low frequency and high consequence to low consequence, we would all start with an active shooter, right? And we would put school shooting in there as high consequence. But we would have to put it in as low frequency because it's less than 6% of the events that occurred last year.
I don't know if you can see my cursor. So that means it goes here in this high consequence, low frequency sector.
Right. And so I would ask you to think about the other things that maybe your school has not adequately prepared for. Severe weather events, a non-custodial parent coming in to take a kid, someone coming in and stealing iPhones, a fight, a medical emergency, someone goes into anaphylactic shock, a student falls down a flight of stairs, there is a massive fight at the football game, there is a car accident at dismissal, and put all those things on that matrix and really start to look at. So we would assume that we want to keep our training we want our training to focus on high frequency events and high consequence events. And if we look at this matrix for many, many schools, the only thing that they can fill in on the matrix that they've actually trained for is that active shooter event, which is typically low frequency, high consequence. And all the other things that you fill in on that matrix, have we really had training for those? Have we really planned? Have we done anything to prevent those events as well? So I ask you to, reflect a little bit on that, and that maybe that's a way to help us put some of those threats into perspective. So let's go on to finding number two.
So the second key finding is we found that most schools are not prepared for bomb incidents and threats. And this is based on the amount of bomb incidents and threats that we found in our research. So this research actually started as research only into bomb incidents and threats. There is a database for law enforcement that education people are not allowed to access and not able to access. So that information isn't any help to educators who are trying to determine. And so we started doing this research as bomb research, and then we expanded in 2016 to include all school-based violent incidents and threats. But we do still break out bomb incidents and threats separately. And we found that bomb threats are 60% as likely as gun threats. So that means for every 10 gun threats that we have, there are 6 bomb threats. And so then my uncomfortable question that I will pose to you, for every 10 units of preparedness that you've done in your school for active shooter threats or incidents, have you done 6 units of preparedness of bomb threats and incidents? And that typically is not the case in almost any school. We looking at threat types, of known threat types in this past school year, 32% of our threats where the type was reported were bomb threats. So bombs do happen, and bomb incidents and threats do happen. And we have a couple of examples of that. Do you want to speak to any of these?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to understand, when we work with teachers and educators, they're often very surprised that there's any detonations whatsoever. And we're not necessarily talking about a catastrophic detonation, although clearly that's an area of concern that potentially, we're always concerned about. But there's 2 of them here, 2 examples that I wanted to show you, one from November of 18. In this particular case, somebody threw some firecrackers into a trash can in the bathroom. They ignited, a loud booming, smoke fills the hallway. People begin to believe that there's a fire or that there was an explosion. The high school is evacuated. Law enforcement is called in to respond. And again, that is a simulated sort of detonation kind of incident.
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt you for just 1 second. You
Sure.
said firecrackers were thrown into a trash can. When smoke was billowing out into the hallway and there was this loud explosion that people heard, they did not know that it was just firecrackers.
Right.
After
Right.
investigation, they determined that's all it was. I think that that's really important in all of these incidents, that yes, hours and hours and hours later, we determined the threat wasn't really that high.
And that's a great point. They found out the next day that there was no intoxicated man trying to steal kids off the playground. But in the heat of the moment, you have to respond. In the heat of the moment, we have a loud noise. We have a lot of smoke filling the hallways. Mm-hmm. And so we have to respond. And in many cases, we're not prepared to respond to a detonation or to that sort of a thing. Then we have sort of the inverse to that, where we have an actual detonation with an actual explosive device with more than an intent to just disrupt things and see if we can get out of class. In this particular one, a construction worker sets off an explosion on the football field where they are building, and school is in session at the adjacent school. So we have these detonations that occur anywhere from 4 to 6 per year that occur, and we're not necessarily, in many cases, equipped to deal with them, both in the threat aspect, but also in the actual identification of suspicious packages, identification of suspicious elements or things that, bomb-making materials, all those kind of things, because they're there. We know in the thwarted plots that we looked at in the last school year, a significant percentage of the plots that were stopped, the person had bomb-making materials or had discussed making bombs as part of that. So to just think about an active shooter threat and not consider the threat of bombs and bomb incidents is really a problem. And so that's one of the issues that we deal with all the time, is that we hear, well, it was just a threat, so what's the big problem? It's just a threat. Well, there's a lot of consequences, and I think we need to talk very briefly about some of the misconceptions about these bomb threats that aren't a big deal. I mean, educationally, there are a number of costs associated with that. Everything is disruptive. We lost instructional time. We have lots of people that go, that worked, I'm going to do that. We tend to see them in clusters. There's a lot of copycat things. You're doing this response under a microscope because everyone has called their parents, the media is there, fire and EMS are there, law enforcement's there. It is a nightmare in the sense that it compromises the asset of trust and reputation and really creates a lot of anxiety and fear in folks. So there's clearly that educational cost. And then there's also that cost to the community in terms of consumption.
Yeah, and before we move on to that, those costs are costs, whether it is a low-level thing that was just a firecracker and it turns out no one was in danger, or if someone lights an explosion at a construction site and no one is injured, that's a cost. And it's a cost if it's just a threat. When someone writes boom on the wall of the bathroom and people perceive it to be a bomb threat and they respond, there's still these same educational costs. Here's what you were talking about, cost to the community.
Go ahead.
I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Well, so there is a cost to the community. There's a consumption of resources. When we have to call out law enforcement and the bomb squad and emergency responders, those folks ought to be doing something else. They ought to be responding to real emergencies, not someone who wrote boom on the wall of the thing. So
and the anxiety aspect. Make sure you talk about that because that is a community cost as well.
Yeah, and we're going to talk in a second about the cost to students of having all of these things and having them hang over our head, and what are the educational costs. So I'm gonna hold that discussion for a second.
All right.
So the question is, what should we do about it? We need to have training for school people in bomb threat and bomb incident management. Unfortunately, this type of a training does not typically exist. It does not typically occur. It is not typically mandated by a state. And schools are struggling to keep up with the requirements that are placed on them at a state level, and there simply is not enough hours in the day or money in the budget to be able to do this. And then also, as far as bomb training that is for educators from an educational perspective, there's not much. I can tell you there's one. If you head to our website, we do training in this from an educational perspective, and what makes that different is we're sort of the opinion that it's not a good use of your time as educators to do an 8-hour training where 7 hours of it is us talking about energetic materials and partial detonations and the science of bombs.
Shielding distance and yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, but that's not really a good use of your time as educators. So our bomb training is about policies and procedures. It's a little bit about bomb science so that we're aware of what we're up against and what is the scope and the magnitude of the problem, and so that educators can get a little bit better at picking out suspicious devices. But what we really focus on is policies and procedures and how can we prevent bomb incidents, how can we prevent bomb threats, and what does that look like?
And I think that's really critical because a lot of the policies and procedures that we have in place, how we respond to bomb threats, can be very dangerous. When we take the kids out of the relative safety of the building and stand them around out in the parking lot, that is much more of a threat than in the secure environment of the building. So some of the things that we do sort of automatically because we haven't really been trained and thought those through can oftentimes be more dangerous than the actual threat itself.
So I want to move on to our third key finding, and this is the troubling longitudinal trends when it comes to threats has continued in this past school year. So although in this specific year from 17-18 to 18-19, we had a 9.5% decrease in threats, which is great. If you look at longitudinally of the 3 years that we have our identical data set, from 16-17 to this past school year, overall we're looking at a 62% increase. So that trend line is going up, even though we had a slight decrease from last year. And
I want to say a couple quick things about that for your consideration. I want you to think, reflect on this a little bit. A couple of things. Number one, it's not necessarily always a bad thing that the number of threats have gone up. In some ways, I think we have moved people to a sort of see something, say something philosophy. And in some cases, I think that has been beneficial, that people are reporting things that they would have ignored several years ago. So I do think there's that. But when we talked earlier about this high rate of false reports, I think we also have to keep an eye on and start thinking about, as more and more kids are prosecuted for false threats and disciplined, or there is a consequence for making a threat, saying I'm going to shoot up the school or whatever it might be, I think we may be seeing people transitioning into, well, I'm just going to say, I'm going to call 911 and say there's a shooter or there's a student that was shot in the bathroom. I'm going to get the same effect of chaos and disruption and all the things that I wanted out of the threat, but I personally will not be supposedly on the hook or, can't be arrested for making that threat.
Which, like, spoiler alert, that's not how that works.
I'm sorry?
And spoiler alert, that's not how that works.
Unfortunately, but I think in some of our, less fully formed adolescent brains, that might be the rationale behind it. So I do think we have to think of threats in their totality, but we also have to think about, what does that mean? When we continue to have this increase, are we responding effectively? I mean, maybe what we need to be rethinking a little bit about the way that we respond, the way that we're treating these events. Nothing infuriates me more than to see a joke or a hoax reported in the media. When I say I'm going to blow up this school, that is not a joke or a hoax. So I think we need to have some serious discussions about the frequency of threats, about what we're doing and the way that we can effectively minimize those, because we know that there is a cost to that. So let's take a little bit deeper dive into what we see when we see threats.
So we do have different types of threats. We've categorized the threats, and you can see here longitudinal data, and you can maybe see my cursor a little bit. The blue is unspecified threats, and this means that either it was not reported in the media as a specific type of threat, or that the school chose not to disclose the type of threat that it was. We have
or the person making the threat did not specifically say.
Yes, and the green here is gun-specific threats, and the gray is bomb threats under longitudinal. And you'll see what I think is most interesting in this is this spike here of unspecified threats, that we're seeing a lot more threats where it's just, I'm threatening harm against this place, and my methodology is not really important. Do you want to comment on that?
No, I think that's really, I respect the fact that maybe we don't need to report all the specifics of the threats.
Yeah.
But we also have to understand that sometimes the threat is a generalized intent to do harm. Sometimes it incorporates both guns and bombs. There's lots of references to Columbine still, the 20th anniversary of Columbine this past school year. And so I think that the type of threat is significant, but the larger concern is how it's delivered, who's delivering it, and what's the impact on kids. So let's look at that next.
So you can see here 3 different years of our data of the threats involving social media, and you can see that it's decreasing really slightly and staying about the same. And I think it's really important to talk about that the impact of threats that involve social media can be really different from the impact of me just, saying in school, saying a threat or saying something, as opposed to putting stuff on social media. And the consequences really are much more far-reaching. And if I post on Snapchat that I'm coming to school and I'm going to blow up the school, that reaches a much larger audience. And when we talk about this impact of chaos and fear and anxiety and disruption, there's much more impact when I make a threat like that on social media.
Some of the threats that we've tracked on social media, especially in the wake of Parkland, were shared over 120,000 times, which is very different than the 20 kids in a classroom that may have heard me make some sort of a verbal threat.
Yeah.
But I think it is important, the fact that we've got a significant percentage of them from social media, but that's not the only place. If we're going to have a threat and it comes in the school, is a written threat found in the school is a significant percent, more than half the time, in the restroom. We have lots of verbal threats too. So we can't just say, well, that's social media, so we better just monitor social media and then we'll never have any more threats. People are delivering threats through a lot of means, according to our research.
And frankly, I'm typically surprised that this number is so low.
Yeah, me too.
I would, if I had to guess, if I didn't know this information and I had to guess, I would say that social media was involved like 75 or 80% of the time. So just surveilling social media has a lot of other problems, which we've discussed at length other places. But it's not going to catch most of your threats because they're really only involving social media 38% of the time, which I actually think is kind of low. The other quick takeaway that we have that 87, we try to break down individuals who made threats and individuals who perpetrated violence at schools. Only 87% of the folks who made threats at students at school were male, which I don't know how critical that is to know. But it is.
And 87% were students. So it's 88% for males, 87% for students. But I guess the takeaway for me there is that we cannot say, oh yeah, if we got a threat, it's from a student. Not necessarily. We have a significant number of outside actors and people that are influencing the school. Sometimes we have parents and staff that are part of the threats as well. Oftentimes when they're they're irate about something, or they're really angry about something, or whatever. So yes, the vast majority is our students, but we cannot shut our eyes to the fact that there's outside actors as well.
So I want to talk about this, and this is why I said I wanted to hold the discussion for a little while. I think, we talk about threats, and we hear this a lot. Well, they're just threats. Who cares? What difference does it make? No one was hurt. There is a cost to our kids that we have this incredible rate of threats happening, that we have these intense security type interventions in the name of school safety. And I've actually had a conversation with someone who was saying that we should arm teachers. And they said, I'm not a gun rights person, but we should arm teachers because we should do whatever it takes to keep kids safe at school. And I think we need to shift that. We need to do whatever makes sense.
Or whatever works.
Whatever works, or whatever actually makes sense. I think, there is a cost to our kids. And so we have a couple of different case studies to talk about this. Do you want to talk about this? I think you're more familiar with this one than I am.
Yeah, this one occurred in February, and it got pretty widespread media attention, so I'm sure you most likely saw it. But this was a situation where the school went into lockdown. They were in lockdown for some period of time. This girl wrote a message to her parents in marker on her arm because she said if she was killed, she wanted them to know that she loved them. And there's a lot of problems there's a lot of problems right here just in one photo. One is the fact that we're going into lockdown for a bomb threat, but everyone thinks it's an active shooter. So there's a communications problem there. But it really typifies this idea that if there's going to be an active shooter event, it's going to be in a school. And if anything happens in a school, it's going to be an active shooter. And if my kid is injured or killed in school, it's going to be from an active shooter. And that's the only thing I worry about as a parent. How unsafe are we making our kids by saying that's the only thing I worry about? That's the only thing that I'm focusing on. And it's a very heartbreaking photo to have a kid, I believe she was 9, to have an elementary school student assume this is it. And do that. And so I think that kind of typifies the problem. But the next one I think is even more heartbreaking, frankly.
So we always sort of hesitate to talk about this because it's on Tumblr, and so we can't really verify the author of this post. But this person is,
and I'm not sure how much you can even see, but
yeah, they're portraying themselves as a teen, and they're talking at great length about the impact of the school safety culture in their school, which is the school safety culture in a lot of schools. They say that every drill comes with a full day of teachers crying and telling us that they love us so much and they will die for us. And every kid in every class looking around and wondering, who will I die for? Who would die for me? You walk to the bathroom and wonder every second, if it happens now, where will I go? You test supply closet doors to see which ones are unlocked. You memorize which furniture is light enough to barricade a door with. And they go on and on of all of the concerns and sort of this cost, which in this post is weighing really, really heavy on this kid, someone who's purporting to be a kid. As I say, at the age of 12, I was told I needed to know who I would die for and that it was okay if it was nobody, and that was my decision to make. School shootings control us more than adults and non-Americans could possibly imagine, and nobody moves to change unless we're actively screaming. Like, have you considered we're too scared to ask for anything to be changed? And I want to also draw attention to this video, which you probably have seen. This was released yesterday from Sandy Hook Promise, and it's a video that if you haven't seen it, I'm going to spoil it a little bit for you. Starts as sort of like a back to school commercial of all of these things of back to school essentials, and it really, I think, captures the horror and the anxiety and the terror that students feel. There is a cost when we have taught kids how to stop the bleed and how to fight a gunman, and that you see pictures all the time of kids who are pretending to be injured victims for a drill for law enforcement and paramedics. And there is a cost to our kids. And I said in an interview I did yesterday, my prediction is that in 10 or 15 years, when we are able to adequately study this, what we're going to find is that there was absolutely a mental health impact on students of having this be our school safety culture, and an academic achievement impact on students, that we allowed to do anything necessary, anything that was deemed necessary, bulletproof backpacks, ultra realistic drills, security interventions that turn our schools into prisons.
I want you to go back to that Tumblr post for a second, because I think we need to give it a little bit of context here. If that school where this student attended, if that school had a comprehensive all hazards approach where we did active shooter training, and then we did training on how to call 911, and we did training on how to dismiss in a safe fashion and cross the parking lot into the bus lanes, and we did training on tornado safety or drills, and how to evacuate for a fire drill or fire alarm, or how we would evacuate off-site for a gas leak and walk in a formal line to our off-site evacuation.
Or how you're supposed to
writing all of those things.
Or how you're supposed to tell your teacher if you are concerned about your friend who you don't think is going to perpetrate a school shooting, but just they have become withdrawn over the summer, and you think maybe they are struggling with their weight or body image or anything.
So if we are taking this totally, and I don't want anyone to misunderstand that we're saying you should never train for active shooter. Clearly, you should. But this post is a very graphic representation of an obsession that has been thrust upon kids, a high level of anxiety that has been put upon kids at the exclusion of other things that has actually made them less safe rather than more safe. Because that kid writing that Tumblr probably doesn't know what to do if he's there after school and a tornado is coming. He probably doesn't know what to do if someone approaches him and tries to get him to leave with them. He probably doesn't know what to do if he sees a fire in a restroom. Because we haven't done those things, we have forced him into this particular perspective of risk and safety. And so I think that's a really important thing that we need to reflect on. So let's take a quick look at some of the research, not just our opinions, but some of the research in terms of how kids feel about safety in school.
Yeah, and part of this is about violence prevention. The things that we were talking about, the girl writing on her arm, the Tumblr post, the Sandy Hook video, that is because we have, largely speaking, failed to talk about violence prevention. Those things are a result of our focus being entirely on active shooter response, not about violence prevention. And some of the concern is the way that we go about violence prevention. We have a tendency to do that in ways that are seen as quick fix. And one of the concerns that we have about this is violence prevention that looks only like surveillance. So the National Center for Education Statistics indicates that in 2016, 94% of high schools used cameras to monitor students, and that this is double the amount from just 10 years before. And there's a cost to our students when we are surveilling them, and when there is the perception that we are surveilling as opposed to working on climate and culture and building relationships with students. So in a 2017 study, students report lower perceptions of safety when there were more cameras inside the school. They report that lots of cameras inside make them feel as if they were viewed as potential perpetrators who needed surveillance. And so the question is, so what should we do about it? How can we work to prevent violence in schools in a way that pushes against this feeling that students already have about anxiety about violence, and doesn't turn our schools into prisons and make students feel like they're inmates being surveilled? Part of that is to shift our orientation to prevention, that it's not just response. And one really key takeaway that we always talk about in every training that we do is increasing student disclosures. Do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, and I think, clearly we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but I'd like to ask you to reflect a little bit on, if you had a child right now in your school that knew something that you should know, how would they be able to disclose? And yeah, okay, we have a tip line or we have a suggestion box or whatever, but we know that most disclosures come from a relationship-based culture where there is an established relationship and where kids feel that they can confide, similar to the example that Amanda, that you gave earlier of, my friend Nicole is really withdrawn. I don't know why, but I'm concerned. Those sort of disclosures. And we ask schools to really look critically at some of the obstacles that to disclosure that exist in their school. Oftentimes, there's obstacles to disclosure that people aren't accessible, teachers aren't available, or when they are available, they're on their phone. Someone has their face in a screen. One of the biggest obstacles to disclosure is two adults standing together, because the kid's not going to come up and talk to those two adults and have that conversation. So it's really critical that we move beyond just going, yep, we got a tip line, no problem, we're going to find out anything that our kids will tell us. No, we don't. Kids don't tell us and don't make disclosures because they don't believe we're going to do anything about it, or because they don't have a mechanism by which they can do that in a personal manner as a personal relationship. So it's really critical that we take a look at what can we do to get kids to tell us what we know, what they know, because we know that there's a significantly high rate of all of these instances, suicide, other violence, risk-taking behaviors, all these different things people know, but they're not disclosing. And so I think that's a really critical violence prevention activity that we just haven't done enough.
Now, I know you have a lot more to say about violence prevention. It's something that we do a whole half-day training on for folks. But I think unless you have anything else super critical, I'm going to move on to our last finding quick. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So our fourth finding, we found that the number of violent incidents in schools keeps rapidly increasing. So from the 18-19 school year versus the 17-18, the prior school year, we had a 34% increase. And if you look longitudinally, from 16-17 to 17-18, we had a huge 113% increase, and then this gradual 34% increase from the previous year to the last year. So that is a trend that continues to be disturbing. We talked earlier about the incidents, that the incidents are not just active shooters. In fact, only 6% of the incidents that we track were shootings, right here in the middle of this table. So we are seeing a lot more incidents involving false reports. We talked about that, weapons being found. Do you want to speak about thwarted plots? I know that's an incident type that we haven't really talked about yet, and I think that's an important one to mention.
Yeah, that's one, and I think that's the increase in those. Actually, it's down from the year before, but in many cases, that's a function of people actually disclosing things and reporting threats. But thwarted plots are when law enforcement gets involved because there has been a determination that someone had a plan to do something. Typically, there's weapons found, there's lists, there's plans, those sort of things, and that's what the thwarted plot is. But I think the big takeaway through this whole section in this finding is that the variety of potentially violent incidents that schools face is incredibly diverse.
And I have case studies for you.
I'm sorry?
So I have case studies for you, so you can go ahead and talk about these quickly.
Let's take a look at some of them, and we'll just kind of go quickly through these. So first, you have violence that wasn't a shooting in March, where we had to have the sheriff come with pepper balls to disperse a fight with 50 students. Now, we're not going to go into the specifics of whether that's appropriate or not, because none of us were there. But we have 23 students treated for exposure to it. Earlier in the day, there was a false report of a shooting that required a response. And then it was the second campus-wide fight that week. Do you think there is a problem with safety? Yes. Do you think that learning is disrupted? Yes. Was it a shooting? Nope. But it was a violent incident that required a response that they were not necessarily equipped to make, because they hadn't perhaps had training in that area. If we go on to outside actors, a drug dealer threatens to kill the kids of someone that hadn't paid him. The school goes into lockdown. The school's trying to identify who is there. Is there someone coming into the school? Again, not a shooting, but certainly a scary, traumatic incident. You want to do these other ones, or you don't want me to?
Sure, you're going fast. You're doing great.
Okay. 17-year-old girl arrested for attempted murder, tries to run over her boyfriend in the parking lot.
She did run him over. I think she didn't kill him, but she did run him over.
Ran him over. Yes, she actually drove over him. Clearly, now we've got, and when you're thinking of this list I was showing you a minute ago, all these lists of violent incidents that were man-made, all these things that we're talking about now, this one, the next one where you have a social media threat and it ends up with a fight on the bus and somebody comes in and pepper sprays everyone. Those are man-made events. We're not even talking about accidents, medical emergencies, severe weather events, all of these other things that also require training and a response from schools. And then the last one is kind of, I think, not necessarily a violent event, but it really typifies where schools are. This was in October, where two students dressed as the Columbine shooters for Halloween. I was horrified and dismayed yesterday to see the release of the sweatshirts that are school shooting sweatshirts with bullet holes in them that say Columbine. And I have a difficult time articulating my disgust at that. But we as educators have to deal with that. What do we do when someone comes to school dressed this way? What do we do when someone is coming to school wearing that sweatshirt? So that has the potential to be a safety concern, to be a disruption, to be a threat, to make people feel anxious. So we have all of these things happening that are not necessarily just purely an event where someone walks in with a weapon, but they're still requiring a significant response on the part of the school. And we're just not getting enough training in what to do about it and how to deal with those.
So if we know that there's lots of different types of incidents that schools are dealing with, the question then is, so what do we do about it? The first big thing is to move away from this checklist mentality. And I realize how difficult it is for schools when we feel like we have this checklist of active shooter drills and trainings that we must do. And so we need to be able to move past that of, okay, well, I did what was required of me, so I can pat myself on the back and we can forget about school safety until next fall when I do what's required of me then. And the way to change that mentality is to make school safety part of our daily operating procedures. One way of doing that is we talk about schools that have leveled lockdown. So we can have different types of responses. So when we have 50 students who are fighting each other and law enforcement comes, we don't have to do a level 3 lockdown as if it's an active shooter. We can go into a level 2 lockdown because we want to keep the kids contained, but we can also communicate clearly it's not an active shooter, it's not a life or death situation. We talk about violence prevention. One of those is engaging with visitors. How can we do a better job of knowing and understanding who is on our school campuses? And we talk about the impact that can have of being able to do it. And I don't have a slide for it, unfortunately, but I think a really important part of incorporating this into our daily operating procedures is our communication procedures. And really framing this work as school safety skills. I need teachers and to a certain extent students to have school safety skills. Now we might use them because it's football practice and a tornado's bearing down. I need the school safety skill of reverse evacuation and what's our communication plan. I might need that school safety skill because someone is threatening to come on campus and kill the children of the people who owe him money. Whatever the case may be, I'm still applying those school safety skills. And I think that's a really important way to frame this work, to really be all hazards and comprehensive. But also, that's not scary. Having a skill of how to communicate or how to reverse evacuate or whatever the case may be, having those skills is not scary. And I think, we teach really little students how to stop, drop, and roll. The thought of burning to death is really scary, but the skill of stop, drop, and roll is not that scary. So I think that's an important way to do it. Do you have anything else you want to add to this, or do you want me to kind of wrap it up here?
Well, I think it's really important, when we go out and do vulnerability assessments in schools, we see the same things over and over and over that are generalized problems that compromise the safety of a school. One of them is a lack of visitor engagement. We don't have a second line of defense. We just have this buzzer system, and you push the buzzer and I push the buzzer and you walk in. So a lack of visitor engagement, a lack of supervision. We don't have enough people there when school begins and when school ends, or we haven't prepared for after hours. So we see the same sort of things over and over. That lack of visitor engagement, that lack of supervision, like what you talked about, the lack of daily operational procedures, that disconnect between here's what we have written down and then here's what we really do. That disconnect is a really dangerous situation where we have people that don't really know what to do because they have never been trained or empowered to do so. So we have this really highly centralized idea that the only person that knows what to do in this crisis event that's not an active shooter, but in this crisis event, is the principal, and no one else knows what to do, and everyone's standing around waiting for instructions instead of responding to this medical emergency or this parent that's kicking down the classroom door or this fight that's happening in the cafeteria. So that's why I think you see us really harping on this idea of an all hazard sort of approach, because all of these things that we've just talked about and some of the additional ones, using ID badges, securing unused areas, screening visitors, all those things, they don't cost a tremendous amount of money. They cost the will to invest in people and invest in training and to look beyond just one narrow sort of event. And so I think that's kind of the takeaway from the study in general, is that we have to look beyond our most irrational fear and really look at what is the most likely event to occur, and have we prepared for that in addition to the specter of a school shooting. And that grid we showed you earlier really can help you to put that into perspective. So
where do we go from here? Obviously, we haven't solved it all in this short period of time.
No, but we've said a lot.
But hopefully you feel that there is so much that we can do. And I know the purpose of this webinar wasn't to get into a ton of strategies or specific things to be implemented, but to more start to think of that conversation of what really is the case and where do we go from here. There is so much that we can do. I do want to say, if there's someone that you wish had seen this webinar, it's going to be archived. Those of you who joined us live, we are thrilled that you're here, but you can watch it later and it'll be archived, and you can head to our website, eschoolsafety.org/webinars. That's where that's going to be. This is part of an ongoing series of free online educator-focused professional development. So part of that is our live streams that we do on the Thursdays when we're not having this webinar. Part of that is our podcast, our School Safety Free Period podcast, which is a little bit less formal, a little bit less academic, and we talk about things that are too absurd to be true, but they are true, and then we have some takeaways, so it's sort of that edutainment, so it's fun and it's entertaining. If you enjoyed this webinar and you want to check out the next webinar that we have upcoming, it'll be next month on October 17th. We have a webinar talking about the hypocrisy of school safety. Do you want to explain a little bit what that webinar is going to be about?
Yeah, I think, Mandy, you're the one that brought this phrase into my lexicon last year, and that was the whole idea of security theater, of looking like we are doing something when we're not. And so I think we need to take a little bit of a harsh look at what are we really doing, as opposed to this is the shiny thing we're holding up and saying, here's how we're keeping your kids safe. What are we really doing? And so we're going to take a little bit of a critical look at that. And every one of the webinars really hopes to combine some provocative sort of questions and some reflection for you, but also some specific strategies of things that we can do.
So, and then we also, another way that you can connect with us, you can sign up for our webinar. If you have a QR code scanner, you can pause the video.
Our newsletter. You said our webinar.
Sorry, for the newsletter. We have so many free online professional development resources. I can't keep them straight.
I can't even say them all.
I can't keep them straight. If you have a QR code scanner, you can pause the video and do that. You can also pause the video and type in, I'm sorry, that's the best URL I have for signing up for the newsletter. If you go to our website and you aren't signed up for the newsletter, it'll pop up and prompt you to sign up. So that's pretty easy to come by as well.
And I realize it's 2019 and newsletters aren't necessarily the most exciting thing ever, but it's really difficult to stay on top of all of the developments in school safety, climate and culture, violence prevention. So we like to do that and aggregate that for you and put that in your mailbox, your inbox, not mailbox.
The other resource that we have is our book that we wrote through ASCD, and you can buy it on Amazon. You can probably buy it like anywhere that you buy books. You can buy it on our website. You can buy it directly from ASCD. But what's I like about the book is, number one, we were able to write it without strangling each other, which I think is an accomplishment.
That is actually.
But what I actually like the book is it's very unfussy in the sense that it is academic and there are a lot of citations and it is based in evidence, but it is not it's not our dissertation. It's not your dissertation. It's not my dissertation.
It is a practitioner's guide.
Yes, it is for practitioners. It is for educators. But we've also heard a lot of positive feedback from parents One of the biggest and best advocates we can have for school safety is parents, and you don't know what you don't know. And so this is a really good introduction and primer to that sort of comprehensive all hazards approach.
And many of you are sitting out there wearing both of those hats as educators and parents and other school stakeholders. And that collaboration is really important. And we tried to speak to that in the book as well. And then finally, you can connect with us at our website. I attempt to do Twitter and Facebook, which is another good way to get information in your hands quickly and to stay on top of some of the things that are happening in the field. So we encourage you to do that. Reach out to us, email us, let us know what we can do to help. And then finally,
I was there and then you changed your mind. Talk about something else.
There you go.
So if you need proof of participation for this webinar, you can head to the website. There is a cost to defray us being able to give you proof of participation. The resource itself is totally free, but there is a slight cost for that. And if you head to our website, eschoolsafety.org/webinars, you can sign up for proof of participation for this webinar. And if you feel like you liked this one and you also want proof of participation for the other ones that are coming up this fall, there is bundled pricing if you want to get proof of participation for all four. You do have to take a quiz, which I think will expand your knowledge, but that is for us to be able to know that you actually participated and were here for the webinar.
And keep in mind, you'll need to work with your local professional development organization as to how that transfers into credit. But we provide you the proof of participation to enhance your professional development. So we're hoping that you will try to join us pretty much every Thursday. Invite your friends, have conversations with your staff. I think it's a great opportunity for professional development to occur either live, where you can interact with us, or that's archived. But on Thursdays, you'll either have the opportunity to participate in one of these webinars each month, or to participate in our live stream of the podcast, where we talk about the things that have been occurring. And we try to make it very timely and very much what's on your mind as educators in this school year. So we'll try to make that as strategy-based and real as we can for you. And we welcome your suggestions and comments of what do you need, what would you like to hear about. We would love to connect with you.
So that's the end of this webinar. We really appreciate those who joined us live, and folks who are not joining us live. We're hoping that in the future, when you watch this, which is the present for you, that you enjoy it. And always don't hesitate to reach out with us with any questions or anything that we can do to help.
Thank you.